I think we can work with people within communities to figure out solutions, to understand how to prioritize which taxpayers have urgent needs. It's kind of like your airline example. I'm about to miss my flight versus I have 3 hours, right? Can we figure
Well,
out?
in this case, it was like, we're not flying for 4
Well,
days,
right.
and you can't get a flight, and I'm going to be stuck, or am I going to be stuck, or am I? So I think your ranking of the issues is a good idea. Like, you're trying to say, we're going to get this information, but people who have still lingering problems, you're not suggesting that you have to have an accountant to get that information,
No,
right?
not at all. No.
Okay, so, but you're pledging to me that you're going to look at some innovative ways to try to get two-way communications into regular taxpayer discussions who really have complicated cases that really do need an answer.
Yeah, and I think partnering with the taxpayer advocate is critical to that effort, and I'm committed to doing that.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Cantwell, Senator Menendez.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Werfel, over the past year, I've led over 8 letters, many of them with a fair number of my colleagues, to the IRS about a range of customer service issues impacting taxpayers. I'm pleased that the IRS has implemented some of the measures that I've called for, like the expansion of overtime opportunities for IRS employees and creating surge teams, which have been critical in reducing pandemic-related tax return and correspondence backlogs. But as the new filing season begins, the IRS simply needs to do better. In 2022, a taxpayer who called the IRS had a 1 in 10 chance of speaking to a representative. Tax professionals have said that reaching the practitioner priority service is, quote, virtually impossible. So what do you consider an acceptable level of telephone service?
It's a great question. First of all, I'm going to lose sleep if I hear about one taxpayer who called the IRS and didn't get through. So in some ways, Senator, I feel, maybe this is unrealistic, but in my heart, I want it to be 100%. But I mentioned earlier, I think in response to a question from Senator Carper, the strategy, I think, should be to benchmark. What are the best-in-class, world-class customer service agencies achieving in terms of call rates? I want to understand how they measure it, and I want to beat those metrics if I'm confirmed.
Well, the National Taxpayer Advocate recommends an 85% level of telephone service as a minimum. Right now, as of February 10th, the IRS is answering 90% of calls. That's good.
That is.
But I want us to see a maintenance of that and hopefully a progression. Is that something you're committed to?
Yes.
And how do you intend to go about ensuring that the IRS is able to consistently provide this level of service?
Well, I look at the Inflation Reduction Act certainly as an opportunity to strengthen the overall resources that we have, increase customer service, technology that is strategically placed within the customer service solutions that are efficient, that get certain questions that taxpayers have can be answered by technology, and we should be putting those in place and testing those. So I think sustaining it is coming up with a strategy and implementing that strategy for a higher performing service apparatus, which involves improved process, hiring more people, training those people, improving technology. I think all of these things will be part of a plan that I hope to work with this committee on for improving service and, as you raise, sustaining it.
Yeah. Well, this is one of the efforts I've led here to try to have the resources, the chairman as well, for the IRS to do its job. Because in my view, the IRS is in the customer service business, and it needs to get back to basics. That means answering the phones, processing tax return, processing timely refunds, and which is almost along the lines of what people would expect of their elected representative. Answer the phone, give me a responsive answer to a mail that I sent you, and do it in a timely fashion. I want to echo, I understand that I was chairing a foreign relations hearing, but I want to echo the question of the topic of equity in tax administration. I think others may have referred to it, but that joint report from Stanford and the Department of Treasury found that black taxpayers are at least 3 times as likely to be audited by the IRS. Now, the agency doesn't collect data on race or ethnicity, but the disparity is attributed to the IRS computer algorithms that select the returns for audit. So at the same time, the IRS is known for low audit rates of high-income taxpayers and large businesses, which has led to an estimated gap in tax collections of nearly $500 billion. So do you plan on addressing these disparities that the IRS have confirmed?
Absolutely. I mentioned earlier, Senator, these are very concerning. Equity is a critical part of effective tax administration. We should be constantly understanding where activities are having a disparate impact on any particular group. It's particularly concerning if it's having a disparate impact on racial minorities. I will, if confirmed, work with the IRS to understand why this is happening, get to the root cause, and figure out solutions so that it doesn't happen in the future.
Good. Finally, taxpayers have a right to receive prompt refunds regardless of whether they file online or by paper. It's unacceptable that 13 million taxpayers who filed via paper waited an average of 6 months or longer to receive their refunds. As you can imagine, these delays cause taxpayers to feel confusion, frustration, experience financial hardship, all of which are preventable. In March, the National Taxpayer Advocate issued a directive requesting that the IRS implement scanning technology to ensure that taxpayers receive timely refunds while also saving the agency time, money, and resources. Scanning has been used by 17 state tax agencies for over 20 years. The benefits are clear. I'm pleased that Secretary Yellen has promised to move forward with plans to automate the scanning of individual paper returns. Do you commit the IRS to implement scanning technology for all individual paper returns by the 2024 tax filing season?
Senator, moving from paper to digital environments is an absolute priority. I know that they have started scanning and looked at scanning solutions. I want to, if confirmed, understand exactly where they are, but the commitment that I would have is like we should absolutely be pushing more paper to electronics, and I think scanning is the way to go.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Menendez. Senator Johnson, I think, is going to make a couple of points. He has one question, and I have one question, and going to wrap up with a short statement. So, Mr. Werfel, you are about to be liberated. I know it's hard to imagine because you probably thought you were going to be here eating your cornflakes, and I am stunned as the father of 5 children that your kids have been so patient through this whole thing. They've been trying not to smile, which I'm sure would not be the case with respect to my children. So, Senator Johnson.
That's called good parenting.
I guess, yes.
Let me start, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank you for how welcoming you've been to this committee.
Thank you.
This is my first hearing as a member of the Finance Committee. I gave up a position and all my seniority on Senate Foreign Relations and on Commerce Committee to be here for this issue. It's an incredibly important issue. Now, how do you raise the revenue the federal government needs to govern this country? And it needs to be done in a very fair manner. I was fortunate that Senator Crapo asked me to sit in for him as ranking member. I was happy to do it because I wanted to sit through this full hearing. I wanted to hear what the committee was like. I wanted to hear the points made by the members. And what I did hear, an awful lot of areas of agreement. Now, there's no doubt about there's differences here, okay? But coming from the private sector, I found out that the only way you really accomplish things in the private sector, and Mr. Werfel, you probably discovered this too, is you search for and exploit areas of agreement. There's plenty of things that divide us, but concentrate on the areas of agreement. So again, I want to work with you, Mr. Chairman, try and find those areas of agreement and do the work of the American public. I think when it comes to tax policy, I've never really liked the term tax reform. I'd much rather concentrate on tax simplification and tax rationalization. I think if we would do that, I think it would remove an awful lot of the headaches that you're going to be experiencing as commissioner. I know you did in answer to, I think it was Senator Cornyn's question, maybe somebody else, you said your position or your job as commissioner is not to be proposing or even really commenting on legislation or taking position on it. But I do hope as commissioner you inform this committee what laws, what legislation are giving you headaches, are making it very difficult to administer the tax law in a fair and impartial and efficient manner. I think it's extremely important. So my question for you, and sorry if you did cover this, but I did have to go for votes a couple times. One of your challenges is going to be replacement of the baby boomers, as well as whatever hires now Congress has enabled you to do with their funding. In Wisconsin, probably the biggest challenge for any employer is finding people to hire. So my question is, have you considered that? Do you have a strategy for dealing with the replacement of many people in the current workforce, and then hiring qualified and hopefully impartial staff for the IRS to administer our tax code?
Thank you for the question, Senator. Absolutely. The statistics that you raise on the retirement of the baby boom generation, I think that's going to hit a lot of industries and a lot of government agencies. Looking at the statistics that I've seen, it's going to hit the IRS very hard, with tens of thousands of employees set to retire over the next 5 to 6 years. How do we backfill those? I start first with partnering with the Office of Personnel Management in terms of the broader government recruiting that they do. I also believe that there can be outreach to communities, to retirees that may want to come back and work and serve their country in this way if they have expertise. I think about veterans. I think about schools and graduate programs. There's maybe not everybody, but there are individuals that I think would be excited about the opportunity to serve their country in this particular way because they're interested in tax administration. They're fascinated by the world in which we operate. As Oliver Wendell Holmes said, taxes are essential to a civilized society, and I think some people get the itch to want to be involved in that. So I'm excited in particular about how to get people outside the IRS today who we're going to need in the future excited about the mission and on board. And if we do it right, they'll come on board with all the right mindsets of fairness, equity, impartiality, so that we can, in every step we do, build trust.
Again, I appreciate that. Appreciate your willingness to take on this task. It's an enormous task. And my final point, Mr. Chairman, is there is a difference between tax avoidance and tax evasion. I don't think there's anybody on this side of the aisle that is going to support tax evasion. We all want to clamp down on tax cheats. There's no doubt about that. I would like to simplify the tax system, rationalize it so that tax avoidance, which is a legal thing, but if we simplify our tax code, that won't be as big an issue either. So again, thank you, Mr. Werfel. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Johnson. And Mr. Werfel, we send you off, and I'm going to pick up on a point that Senator Johnson made, and you probably know this because of your involvement with Chairman Hatch, who wasn't exactly an atomic secret. He treated me like a son, and we did big things in this room, child welfare and health care, a host of issues. And we did it, and I think this really touches on where we are, and I don't want to put words in his mouth, but where I think Senator Johnson wanted to go. We have big differences of opinion in this room, no question about that. But we also have a history in the Senate Finance Committee of being able to find common ground. And I will tell you, I am particularly proud of the fact that this committee helped to break the gridlock on the gun safety legislation in the last Congress, because there were people who said, oh, it's mental health. There are people who said it was guns. I'm of the view that there are issues on both sides. We ought to keep guns out of the hands of people who shouldn't have them, but mental health is a big challenge. And this committee came to play right away, and we put into black letter law the text that Senator Murphy and Senator Cornyn were able to use on those mental health provisions. I can tick them off for you. It was help through Medicaid in schools, the suicide, hotlines. We made it possible to get additional help. Prevention, Senator Stabenow's historic help with respect to behavioral health. So you'll find here that you get us the facts about where the department wants to go. You've said to several senators that you expect us to hold you accountable. I'll start by saying the 60 days on the racial discrimination issue. I think you heard from colleagues, we started off probably 3 hours ago. members of this committee think this is very, very serious, this kind of discrimination, in effect, where nobody's even looking for it.
Yep.
God only knows what you'd find if you were looking for it. This is serious business, so I'm expecting that. I want to know what you think the reasons are for it and what we're going to do in correction. So I'm just going to ask one additional question, and then we'll call it a day, and you won't have to stay here until breakfast time tonight. You could hear members talking about their interest to the greatest extent possible in voluntary programs. You know, Senator Blackburn and I were talking about some of the issues with the restaurants and the hairdressers and the like. I said, not going to be any mandates here. The fact is, for most Americans, the government has the relevant information that they need to complete a tax return. These are the firefighters and the nurses and the teachers that my wife always says, I hear this so many times I wake up in the middle of the night. My husband's talking about firefighters, teachers, nurses, and 2 tax codes. But the government has the information. And what's wrong with the idea if someone in Oregon or any of our states says, I would like the government, and this would be purely voluntary, let me underline it, purely voluntary. And if all the big tax prep firms try to say it would be a mandate, I want them to hear purely voluntary. But if a person says, I'd like the government to take the information it has, kind of give me a draft return, I'll make any changes and send it back. What is wrong with having a voluntary approach like that? Your thoughts?
Well, I would go back to the question of what are the authorities the IRS has? Is this something that would have to be implemented in law, or can it be administered without a law? If it needs to be implemented by law, then my opinion on this as a potential commissioner, Mr. Chairman, would be, can we do it? What are the gaps that we have with our technology?
What do you make of the fact that so much of the rest of the world does it? We're all wondering, oh my goodness, it's so complicated. Much of the rest of the world looks at us and says, hey folks, how can it be that you can't figure this out? And I'm not talking about the administration of it. You're making very valid points. But having heard how senators feel about the nature of a voluntary program, I assume you don't have problems with voluntary programs in this, area.
I don't. And in fact, first of all, you mentioned other, whether it's states or nations. I'm a big fan of benchmarking. I want to understand what other tax administrators are doing, where they're having success with customer service and their experiences. And I think that's going to be part of a go-forward plan. Your point around, is this a solution that can really unlock a lot of benefits for taxpayer service? We should be looking at it. I just put it to tax policy and this committee to decide whether the wisdom of that, if it requires a legal change, and my seat at the table.
Well, as you know, we already put language in to the legislation. I and several colleagues have been interested in it, so you're going to do it. I just want somebody to have their heart in it.
Yes.
That's why I'm asking you.
Yes. I'm very interested in it.
Constantly
Yep.
stunned when I have town meetings. I made this commitment to have town meetings, every county, every year, 1,030. When I bring this up, people look at me, yeah, what's holding it up? And it's hard to explain it. So you got a lot on your plate, but right at the core of the mission is we want everybody in America to have a chance to get ahead. I want people to be successful. You know, I've authored the first billionaire income tax, and I made it clear I want people to be successful, but I think we all ought to be paying their fair share, and that's right at the heart of this. And what senators were telling you is when you have audit rates that are so much higher for the purpose of for the person of modest means than it is for the wealthy, that doesn't pass the smell test in terms of fairness. You got a big job to do. I was for you before you showed up today, and I think you have today accounted for yourself very well on these key kinds of questions with respect to fairness and professionalism. I look forward to supporting you. I hope we'll be able to move your nomination soon, and I hope we'll be able to get support on both sides of the aisle. With that, Mr. Werfel.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Colleagues, one more little bit of business. I jumped the gun. We thank you, Mr. Werfel, for your testimony. Members of the committee will have until the close of business on Friday, February 17th to submit questions for the record. The Finance Committee is adjourned.